Hi everyone, it's Dr. Pat Ford, and this is the follow-up short video on 333 exemptions, COAs, and the Part 107 coming up hopefully this summer. Again, it'll be a quick introduction, but hopefully it'll clarify some of the questions you've had throughout the class on what the meaning of each of these are relative to civil operations as well as public operations. Now, the approach we'll be taking is I'm actually going to use FAA provided bullets, and what I mean by that is I'm actually pulling the bulleted items from screenshots from the FAA websites. I'm going to provide a basic overview of what those mean, but I want to stress to be sure to visit the FAA website for information before deciding which way you need to proceed. So one of the things we brought up was the question of what type of UAS operator are you? We talked about you could be a public government entity, in which case you needed a certificate of waiver or authorization, or a COA. You could be a civil non-government entity, in which case you would need a 333 exemption unless you're a hobby or recreational user, which we covered. We're not going to cover the UAS manufacturer side today, which requires a type certificate process, but again we'll focus on the public government entity and the civil non-government entity and what you need to do to move forward to operate within those realms. And the first one of these issues is the 333 exemption process. A little bit of background. As of right now, there's about 3,100 petitions that have been granted by the FAA, and that was as of 2 days ago. And what does the 333 exemption really mean? Well, at the heart of it is just right here. By law, any aircraft operation in the NAS requires a certificated aircraft, a licensed pilot, and operational approval. All right, so what we've got here is you require a certificated aircraft registered. The 333 exemption is an exemption so that you can have your aircraft properly certificated. You still need to register your aircraft with a IN number. You need to be a licensed pilot, and you still need a COA for operational approval. So how that breaks down is answering a few questions that are actually part of the frequently asked questions on the FAA website. First one is, what are the main requirements needed? All right, in order to fly in a civil operations, you're going to need a 333 grant of exemption. Remember, that allows your aircraft to be certificated to fly. You're going to need a certificate of waiver, which authorizes you to actually fly that aircraft in a specific manner for a specific purpose. You're going to need to register the aircraft with the FAA, and that's your November call sign. And you're going to have to be, or you're going to need to have, a pilot with an FAA airman certificate. Those are the key issues of a 333 exemption. The guidance you can find simply by going to the FAA.gov website, but if you just do a search for Google FAA UAS 333, it will take you right there. But the key issue there is all of the information that you required for submission of a petition is located at that specific area. And it is not an easy process. For those of you that have gone through the 333 exemption process, you know it's quite a bit of paperwork. So as you start on this objective, you're going to probably want to reach out if you know anybody that's done one, or get some, what they call boilerplate or reference material to go by, so you're not trying to create everything from new when you start that process. In a broad scope, a 333 exemption is a petition for exemption, and this is a big issue. When you put in your 333 exemption request, you're going in with all of the other exemptions that are being reviewed by different personnel at the FAA. And that could be a broad variety of different manned and unmanned aircraft issues, airport issues, all types of things that require an exemption. So it's a big pool that you're diving into. Remember, you don't need a 333 for hobby or recreational use. And so re-stressing that again, but again, if you're out there just doing hobby recreational, UAS flight is not an issue for you. You'll hear a lot of people talking about you've got the new NPRM coming up, or the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which is 107, being reviewed. Do you still need a 333? Absolutely, because 107 has not been approved. So at this point, civil operations 333 exemption. And if you submit a petition for exemption under a section 333, you still need to have a COA. And this gets to be kind of confusing. The current 333 exemption process for UAS has been modified so that you can fly under 200 feet above ground level nationwide with some very specific restrictions around airports and different airspace and things. A lot of similar to what we've covered in the 2 modules of the MOOC. However, if you are going to fly above 200 feet, you actually have to go through an entirely different COA process. So if you're going outside the parameters of the blanket 200-foot COA that comes with your 333 exemption, you're going to have to go through an entire COA process, in which case you're going to have the exemption number already issued by the 333, and you'll have to have your aircraft registration number of the UAS that you'll actually be flying. When you have those, you'll actually go in and do a form that allows you to put in the information for your civil COA request. Now, the civil COA request is not overly lengthy. It's different from a public COA in that aspect, but that's because a lot of information has already been provided in your 333 exemption request, so the COA application for civil users can be a little bit more streamlined. Now again, remember, you only need to do this process of a civil COA if 200 feet AGL under the blanket COA and the restrictions provided for that on your initial 333 exemption don't meet your requirements. So if you're going to have to fly within certain airspace, or you're going to have to fly at 400 feet above ground level, those are just examples of having to get your 333 exemption first, followed by a COA approving you to actually fly in the space that you want to fly. People will ask, do you need a pilot's license to petition for an exemption under a 333? You can put in an exemption request even if you're not a certificated pilot, but you have to have a pilot in command, either with a commercial, private, recreational, or sport pilot certificate, airline transport, ATP, that can actually fly your UAS. So the answer is, to be approved for your UAS to fly, your PIC has to have a current certificate. If you're a business, that means your business owner doesn't need to have that. But again, you have to reflect who the pilot in command will be that meets the certificated pilot requirements. Here's the unique aspect for 333 exemptions, and there's word out on the street as of this morning that the FAA is trying to update this in the March-April timeframe. But as of right now, when you go to register your UAS, it is not like a recreational hobby UAS where you go online and you're done in about 5 minutes. In this case, you actually have to get a hold of a hard copy AC Form 8050-1 and fill that form out. It comes in a format that is copy duplicates, and you have to have that original form to send in to register your UAS and actually get an IN number or a November call sign number for your aircraft. Now, the emailing information here on the bottom, the phone number, you can call any of those or visit your Flight Standards district office or your local FSDO, and you can actually go by and actually pick up that form. But again, this is the one thing you're not going to be able to do online. You're going to have to actually get the form, fill it out manually, and mail that to the office in Oklahoma. So what we just talked about is that a 333 exemption is going to provide a way for you to actually get your aircraft certificated to fly in the national airspace. You will get a blanket COA approving you to fly around the nation under 200 feet AGL with specific restrictions. And if you want to have a COA that covers a broader scope, meaning flight into other airspace or higher altitudes, then you'll need to put in a request for an updated or new civil COA. And on top of that, your pilot in command, whoever you list in that 333 exemption, is going to have to be a certificated pilot. Now, the public COA, which we're not going to spend a lot of time on here, is a very different approach. The public COA, you have to start by getting an OE AAA access or obstruction evaluation airport airspace analysis account in order to be able to actually go on and develop your COA. And in the public COA, you're actually going out and confirming right off the bat before you can even get the account that you are indeed a public entity, and there's a process that you have to go through with your state or attorney general in order to be able to prove that. And once you have that, you're going to fill out a lot of information, everything from the proponent, the point of contact, the operational description, your system description, performance characteristics, airworthiness, procedures, all of those issues. The thing that makes a public COA different from a civil 333 is that with a civil 333, you're going in and asking for an exception so that you can have your UAS certificated to fly. And a public COA, the public entity, is coming in with proof of airworthiness as part of the overall COA process. In the end, the COAs mean the same thing from the standpoint that you cannot fly your UAS, even if it has an N number, unless you have an approved COA, either civil or public, that allows you to launch and where you can fly in the NAS. So the end results of the COA end up being the same goal and objective. However, the process is very, very different. Now, the 333 exemption process can take anywhere from 4 months to 6 months or more. The COA process for the public side really is running probably 5 to 8 months at this point. Currently, I'm working for a university as an advisor that has had a COA in the system since August, and we're waiting on that approval, and it's still processing through because of the amount of workload at the FAA. So when you go after these processes to move forward, either in the 333 or the public COA process, remember that this is not going to be a 60 or 90 day turnaround in most cases. You're probably going to have to look ahead at starting operations 5, 6, 8 months down the line by the time you get your full approval. Now you'll hear about the proposal for rulemaking part 107. This is an important issue when it comes to civil operations, not public operations, but civil commercial ops, because it'll standardize the process in basically a carte blanche on very set rules, and under that umbrella, what you can do with your UAS. Now the 107 operational limitations will sound pretty familiar from what we've gone through in the MOOC. You're going to be weighing less than 55 pounds, visual line of sight only, although there's a caveat here. You'll notice that UAS must remain within visual line of sight of the operator or visual observer. And I believe this is basically an approach to take a look at the first person issue of being able to have goggles on as the pilot and still have a visual observer assist you. Again, these are not rules that have been set in stone, but rather being reviewed. You're talking about being able to see the aircraft at all times, which we've just mentioned, daylight operations only, normal issues of yielding the right-of-way. You can use a visual observer, but not required, depending on the type of flights. If you'll notice, you see first-person view camera cannot satisfy see and avoid requirements, but can be used as long as requirement is satisfied in other ways. That gets back to the VisOp issue. And then you've got some maximum airspeeds of 87 knots. And you have some operational limitations with the 107. You've got to have 3 miles of visibility from where you're controlling. Obviously, no Class A flight. B, C, D, and E airspace allowed with the required ATC permission. And now this makes it very cut and dry. You require the permission, not a notice, permission to fly. Operations in Class G are allowed without ATC permission. All right, and it's got, the normal, no reckless flights or whatever the case may be. They're also taking a look at a micro UAS option that would allow a Class G flight over people not involved in the operation. Right, so what's being looked at here is a safety of flight issue for filming can you have a UAS that's light enough that if it falls is not going to impact or hurt anybody in the crowd? Again, these are all things that are being looked at or reviewed in the proposal. Now, the pilot operator certifications, right? You're going to have to pass an initial aeronautical knowledge test and be vetted by the TSA and obtain an unmanned aircraft operator certificate. All right. You've got some other requirements here, but this is a huge change. Unlike the 333, which is requiring you to be a certificated pilot of a manned aircraft certification, with the 107, this becomes a very specific UAS operator certificate. So that allows flight by UAS by many people that would not be able to fly in civil ops under the current 333 exemption process. All right, again, airworthiness certificate is not going to be required. However, you're going to have to maintain your UAS in safe condition. In this case, it is kind of similar to the hobby recreational side. You're not going to have to go out and get a certificate, which means you're not going to have to go out and get a exemption for that UAS that meets the category requirements for the 107 proposal, but you still have to keep it within safe flight. The other issue is model aircraft. Wouldn't apply 107 to model aircraft other than the proposed rule is going to allow or codify the FAA's enforcement under authority in Part 101 to prohibit model aircraft operators from endangering the safety of the NAS. This is an issue that's under a lot of debate. We won't go into it here, but it's one under a lot of discussion, especially with AMA and other groups with the FAA as 107 is being reviewed. So we just jumped through this fairly fast, but what did we really come up with? First of all, obvious rules are far from solidified. As you move forward, check the FAA website often for changes and updates. You may want to take a look at the hard question if you're a business owner or want to be a business operator. Do you wait for Part 107 to come through, or if it's delayed and doesn't come through this summer, did you miss an opportunity by not pursuing a 333 exemption first and getting that rather than hoping that 107 is approved by summer? If it's delayed at all, that could have an impact on your business perspective. From the public side, don't expect any major changes for public users. The COA process looks like it's going to remain the same for public users, registration process, all of those things. Any changes to efficiency that way or how that process is done are still to be determined or TBD. Also, I would stress, don't assume anything. It's pretty obvious that a lot of the rules here are written in jello, for lack of better terms, because it is a very changing environment. A lot of rules that get impacted in a domino effect by whatever decisions are made. So don't assume anything. Always check back and see what's really going on. You'll hear a lot of rumors. Bypass the rumors. Go straight to the website. See what the scoop really is. And finally, safety first. Again, we've stressed the safety culture. If you follow the safety culture, you really can't go wrong from the standpoint of putting in the right type of documentation that is very likely to be accepted versus rejected by missing something. So keep that in mind as well. And that's it for now. If you have any other questions, be sure to use the Ask the Expert area. But I want to stress, don't be afraid to reach out to the FAA and ask the questions that you have on your mind. Two things come out of that. One is you'll know whether you can get an answer or not and assist you. Number two is the FAA gets a feel for the type of questions being asked and where they need to amplify on their website to support people. So frequently asked questions are critical to the FAA to help them build a better website and streamline the process, especially as we go towards proposed rulemakings in Part 107. Thank you.